Welcome back again, guys. My name is Esero, and in this video, I'm excited to introduce the Lightning Wildstrike Raider. In the recent 3.8 Blight patch, the combat focus jewel was updated to also affect Wildstrike. This change takes the skill from being unreliable to being a clear speed monster capable of shredding entire screens in an instant. With a cheap helmet enchant, a single hit from Wildstrike when it's lightning focused will chain 13 times. Combining that with Ancestral Call and the Anointment Tribal Fury will allow each individual swing of Lightning Wildstrike to target 4 nearby enemies, chaining up to 52 times and clearing everything. Add into the mix an Impulsas and you got powerful shocks. 52 chains and nearly every enemy will be exploding. You'll be clearing comfortably up through T16s. And we're attacking over 11 times a second. Every swing can be up to 52 chains. All those chains easily slaughtering breaches, blights, legions, and delve. We're going to be slotting all of this into the newly improved 3.8 Raider Ascendancy. Its recent changes giving it more attack speed, damage, and evasion than ever before. With it, we reach ridiculous levels of attack speed, able to trigger Whirling Blades nearly 5 times a second, giving us map traversal that's hard to match. With the build functioning at maximum capacity, we have a 95% chance to evade, with an additional 75% attack dodge and 65% spell dodge. The build is exceedingly elusive and an absolute monster for clear speed, but it still manages to be a competent bosser. With my current level of investment, I'm able to clear up through T15s quite comfortably, and with the right investment, could even take on Uber endgame. But the true strength of Lightning Wildstrike is its clear speed. Its ability to vaporize nearly every map in the game makes it an incredible map farmer. The 3.8 changes to the combat focus jewels truly were a game changer for Wildstrike. Combine that with the new and improved Raider and you've got a fast, deadly, and elusive build, and one that's honestly just fun as hell and satisfying to play. So without further ado, let's get right into the gear choices that make this build possible. Let's begin with our weapon selection. Our endgame focus is going to be on dual-wielding Imperial Claws, like the ones you're seeing on screen right now. Selecting Claws gives us tons of attack speed, access to powerful leech nodes, and implicits that grant us ridiculous amounts of life, especially with how much we're going to be chaining and how many enemies we hit with our attacks. The leech and life on hit allows us to recover unbelievably quickly when attacking packs. Wildstrike will convert 100% of your physical damage into whatever element it's focusing on. This essentially gives us protection from Fizz Reflect, which is super convenient, but beyond that, it means that we can scale our elemental damage extremely heavily. The majority of our focus should be on scaling lightning damage specifically to take advantage of the Fizz conversion, the elemental resistance penetration, and our shocks. We also have a ton of more multipliers and spots on the tree that give us generic improvements to our elemental damage, so picking up fire damage or cold damage is never a bad thing. We just want to make sure that we're focusing on getting lightning damage the most. We're going to really want a claw that has at least 1.8 or 1.9 or above attacks per second. Other mods we're going to be looking for besides the attack speed are going to be a really high roll on lightning damage, increased crit multi, other really high elemental rolls in fire or cold, and finally we have elemental resistance penetration modifiers. This effect can be added as a fossil crafted prefix or as a shaped suffix, but by far the easiest is going to just be unveiling attacks with this weapon penetrate either 10 to 11% or 12 to 13% of elemental resistances, and just crafting this onto any weapon that has an open prefix slot. These weapon slots are super flexible though. Just get a quick claw, whether it's Imperial or not, that checks as many of these boxes as possible, and you'll be getting through the majority of the game just fine. Let's go ahead and move right into the helmet slot and the enchantment that goes along with it. My top selection is going to come as no surprise. A Starkanja's hood is used in a ton of builds, but for good reason. The benefits it gives us, almost every single thing it does benefits this build greatly. The evasion and the life, attack speed, and crit go a long way to making this build function much better. Starkanja's beats out Devoto's really hard with this build. We do not need the movement speed with how fast we can Whirling Blades around, and the life it grants us is huge. Starkanja's is quite good, but is far from required. If you want to, look into picking up a rare helm that has a solid evasion base. You'll want to be looking for a really high life roll, potentially even percentage increase to maximum life, and as many resists as you can stack. On top of that, you can get a fantastic mod for elementally focused builds, which is nearby enemies have -X% to lightning resistance, boosting our offensive capabilities, especially when bossing. Enchantments in Wildstrike are segregated into basically benefiting their individual elements, which means we really only have one choice, but that choice is fantastic, which is going to be Wildstrike Chains 6 additional times. This enchantment is honestly unbelievably strong and benefits our clear speed greatly. I highly recommend getting this enchantment. Fortunately, it is readily available from 15 to 100C with a ton of selection. And if you're willing to go a tiny bit more expensive, you can pick up some fantastic helmets with the strongest enchantment possible for this build. Next up is going to be the body armor selection. My first choice is going to be Impulse's Broken Heart. I feel that it is the best choice to push the strength of this build, being its clear speed the most. The increased damage, the increased effectiveness of our shocks, and of course the explosions just help push our clear and our offensive capabilities so much. Because of our chains, when we hit a massive amount of enemies at one time and we shock each of them and kill tons of them, a huge portion of the packs explode, hitting all of the rare and the magic mobs even harder, causing our clear to just become much more concise and to leave less rare and magic stragglers behind. It is a potent offensive option and my first choice for the build, but it lacks a lot of defensive capability that other options can present you if you so choose. Duresso's Defiance is surprisingly competitive here in my opinion. It provides you with endurance charge generation, up to 20% attack and move speed. It also grants us an absolute pile of evasion on top of a pretty decent life pool as well. There is some minor consideration to looking at a lore weave. Its selection of stats is versatile and a lot of them help us out a ton, but it's not an evasion base, so it's a little bit tougher to recommend, although the defensive and offensive benefits it grants us are definitely quite noticeable. But beyond the Duressos, the real recommendation I would give for this build, if you really didn't want to run Impulses, would be to go for any generic, rare chest that has a strong evasion base, of course. Look for something like this. You're going to want to be going for all the basics, the really high life, percentage increase to maximum life, and as many resists as you can manage. Some other mods you should look for will be socketed attacks have -15 to their total mana cost. You can also look for attacks have plus X percentage to their critical strike chance. This will boost our base crit, causing our critical strikes to occur much more frequently. All of our modifiers affecting crit chance now do a lot more work for us. But once again, this slot is quite flexible. You can of course use Impulses to give you that offensive boost to your clear speed. Duressos will make you both a little bit more tanky and defensive, but also faster. And even the rare chest piece will still be a fantastic option. Any of these choices should carry you through the majority of the game. Let's go ahead and move right along to our glove selection. There are quite a few fantastic choices available here. With every option that I discussed, we're going to be looking for the Corruption +1 to maximum frenzy charges. We benefit in terms of attack speed, movement speed, damage, evasion, dodge chance, everything. This build is stacking as many frenzy charges as it can get, and if you can afford or find a corrupted version of any of these options with that implicit, pick it up. We'll also benefit quite heavily from the corruption of attacks have plus X percentage to critical strike chance, just like with the armor that will boost our base crit substantially. One of our first choices as a crit-based build is going to be the extremely cheap and affordable Oscarm Nubuck gloves. They grant us a variety of benefits, the first and foremost being, of course, the cursed enemies with level 10 Assassin's Mark on hit. This makes it so that we don't have to be worried about getting Assassin's Mark on our ring and gives us a cheap method to pick this effect up. Combine that with an increase to life, global accuracy, attack speed, and chance to dodge spell hits, and you have an extremely well-rounded and super cheap glove option. This glove is a fantastic choice from the mid-game on and can even last you for the entirety of the build's life cycle, especially if you can get a corrupted version with a strong implicit. The benefits of running Assassin's Mark are honestly kind of disgustingly overpowered. Assassin's Mark performs so well in just about every regard that crit builds have no choice but to use it. Assassin's Mark causes enemies to be crit more often, take more damage, grant life and mana on kill, and grant you power charges. When we're running Assassin's Mark, we will always have 3 power charges up while we're mapping. We have such a high chance to gain a power charge on kill that you're just going to consistently always have them up, giving you a 120% increased critical strike chance. But that's not all. When we curse an enemy with level 10 to 12 Assassin's Mark, the chance to crit them again on a following hit has plus 2% to base crit chance, a massive bonus. And on top of that, we're going to be dealing 20% increased extra damage to them with critical strikes. And if all of that wasn't enough, we're going to be gaining 20 life and mana for every enemy killed. The curse is unbelievably strong and gives us a DPS boost of somewhere around 30% just from level 10 to 12 Assassin's Mark. No matter how good Assassin's Mark is though, it's not required here on these gloves. If you're looking at the other stats on the Oscarms and you just don't think that they're good enough, you can roll with one of these other options I'll be discussing and we can get Assassin's Mark on our ring. This is merely one of the best cheap options we have for getting this effect into our build. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at the Tombfist Steel Scale Gauntlets, a solid choice in a ton of builds, whether it's a 1-socket or 2-socket, even uncorrupted. Putting in a Murderous Eye Jewel causes our enemies to take 10% more damage because they become intimidated on hit. Both the 2-socket version of this glove and some of the good corruptions can get quite pricey, but it's still easy to recommend if you've got the cash. And finally, we're going to have Essence Crafted Gloves, using Essence of Insanity to give the gloves socketed gems have 16% more attack and cast speed. By socketing in Whirling Blades and faster attacks into those gloves, we're going to be moving around the map at even more absurd speeds. This is an effect that I love to have on these builds. It makes them feel so much snappier when you're traversing the map. If you choose to utilize the Essence Crafted Gloves, getting a corruption on them is going to be much tougher, but you can get a lot of great stats in the gloves themselves to make up for it a little bit. Of course, prioritize getting as much life and resist as you can. Beyond that, try to get attack speed, fizz damage, and lightning damage to attacks, increased critical strike chance against shocked enemies, or try to even stack as much int or strength as you can to make hitting our requirements for gems a little bit easier. Any one of these three will serve you very well. Moving right along to the boots, we're going to have my primary selection of the Dark Ray Vectors. They are going to be a Frenzy Charge focus boot, giving us tons of benefits for having Frenzy Charges as well as giving us +1 to maximum Frenzy Charges. These boots grant us, with full Frenzy Charges, 40%, and with the Glove Corruption, 45% movement speed. They also provide us with a reasonable amount of lightning resistance and also give us a 16% chance to dodge attack hits when our Frenzy Charges are up, giving us a huge boost to our evasion. But it really comes down to that +1 maximum Frenzy Charges. That one stat alone makes such a huge difference for us. These boots are easily my first choice and are ultra affordable. You can get them for as cheap as just 1C. Due to how cheap they are and their wide availability, there are a lot of good corruptions available as well on these. You can get increased maximum life, increased movement speed, chance to dodge attack hits, even just level to socketed gems. The boots are just unbelievably versatile. You can either get them super cheap, you can get a variety of corruptions, you can get an uncorrupted lab enchanted version. Some great boot enchantments for this build are, of course, anything that adds a whole bunch of elemental damage. The 16% increased attack and cast speed if you've killed recently could be fantastic while mapping. Any of the enchants that grant you dodge chance or additional movement speed are great, and of course the damage penetrates 10% of enemy elemental resistances if you haven't killed recently can be fantastic for bossing in a lot of different situations. And of course all of these enchantments apply to picking up a pair of rare boots as well. The Dark Ray Vectors, they do a lot, but they don't grant us life. So if you're hurting on life, or you've taken a lot of the unique options so far, and you don't have the resist you need, a pair of rare boots can do a lot of good work for you. Shoot for 100+ life, you can stack a ton of resist on a pair of two-tone boots, get 25-30% movement speed, and you can also look for stats like chance to dodge attack or spell hits. We're going to very deliberately be going with a rare amulet, and as before with rare item selections, the same sort of rules apply with the life and the resist, but here we really want to take advantage of being able to get critical strike multiplier. Offensively, we're also going to want to be looking for a high percentage increased elemental damage with attacks, and also trying to get a high roll on added lightning damage to attacks. Beyond that, the selection is not picky. You can get whatever decent amulet you can get your hands on, and if you need to focus on resist, do that. Strength and int, do that. Damage, do that. Whatever your build is capable of socketing in, very flexible. What's not flexible is the Anointment, and our Anointment selection optimally in endgame is not going to be super cheap, although I will present you with additional options that are much cheaper if you don't want to commit that heavily or don't have the cash for it. I'm going to present you with a few different options, one of them being really cheap, a couple of moderate expense, and the more expensive but really premium options for anointments. The first, and by far the cheapest option, is going to be to pick up Ambidexterity, which will give you a huge boost to your attack speed and your attack damage, a boost of about 6.5% DPS for only a black, an azure, and an amber oil, maybe not even 10C total cost. Our medium cost option is going to be Primeval Force or Arcing Blows, both of them giving us about an 8.5% increase to our DPS. They are both going to cost around 70C because they both utilize a single silver oil, Primeval Force utilizing a silver, violet, and azure, and Arcing Blows using a silver and 2 clears. If you do decide to go for Primeval Force, you can unallocate the rest of the cluster to use those 3 points elsewhere in the build, and if you go for Arcing Blows, you'll be reaching something that we normally wouldn't have access to. And the final and best option that we've got for us, as well as the most expensive, is going to be Tribal Fury, an anointment that I've already fallen in love with in just a couple of builds. It allows strike skills to target 1 additional nearby enemy, essentially providing us with half of the benefit of Ancestral Call just on our amulet. This anointment costs 1 golden, 1 silver, and 1 opalescent, essentially the equivalent of around 300 C, but the effect is so worth it. Anointing this either allows us to take Ancestral Call directly out of our 6th link and allows us to put in something else like Inspiration Support, which will give us a huge boost to our crit chance as well as a massive more multiplier to our elemental damage, or the 6th link can be left as is, and now you can target 1 more additional enemy on top of the 3 you could already target. This is the callback to the overview at the start of the video. Without the anointment, we are able to target 3 nearby enemies, chaining 13 times for each enemy hit, so you swing once, hit 3 enemies, 13 chains per enemy, up to 39. But with the anointment, we can push that to 52, cranking clear speed even further. This is the way that I prefer to play it, with the Ancestral Call intact as well as Tribal Fury, clearing the entire screen. It's like you've got Arc on steroids. It's extremely fun. But even without the Ancestral Call, you're still going to be clearing very well. And if you're looking to push that boss killing damage, absolutely consider trying no Ancestral Call and swapping in something stronger to boost your damage further. We'll discuss all those options and more in the gem link section of the video. There'll be shortcuts in the description if you need to navigate there. Alright, I think it's time to discuss the rings. So our first primary selection is going to be a Shaper Rare Ring that features curse enemies with level 12 Assassin's Mark on hit. This is an even higher level version of the curse than we would get from the Oscarm Nubuck gloves, and this is one of the best places to get the effect. It can be a little bit expensive to get a fantastic ring, so when you're picking this up, if you do decide to go for it, if you can get some decent life and a few resists, or even 1 other beneficial effect, you've got a fantastic ring on your hands. You're not going to be going for tier 1 quality here. The most important fact is that we're going to have the curse on the ring itself. And of course, if you are running Oscarms, you do not want to double this curse up. It does not function that way. For the other ring slot, or in place of the Assassin's Mark ring, we can of course just run normal rare rings. You're going to want to be stacking all the usual suspects. Go for a coral or a 2-stone ring so that the implicit is working towards your life or resists, and of course stack as many of those life, resists, elemental damage with attacks, lightning damage to attacks, fizz damage to attacks, any of those, including attack speed as well, will all serve you extremely well. A personal favorite of mine is going to be the super cheap and affordable Circle of Regret Synthesized Topaz Ring, a synthesis related item. It's going to feature a variety of implicits and a mix of different stats specifically tailored to Herald of Thunder. Each ring will have 2 Herald of Thunder effects. Some of them are very potent defensively and some of them are very potent offensively. Defensively, you can get up to 60% lightning resistance, you can increase your maximum lightning resistance by 1, or you could even reduce the mana reservation of Herald of Thunder by up to 40%. Offensively, you can get up to 60% increased lightning damage while you're affected by Herald of Thunder, and you can also get Herald of Thunder has up to 100% increased buff effect. Both of these can be quite strong, especially when tailored together. The ring will automatically come with a decent boost to our intelligence, a nice lightning roll, and just inherent lightning resist. There is an unbelievable variety of implicits that this ring can have. You can curse enemies with conductivity, you could get increased maximum life, you can get resists, you can get increased lightning damage. There are a lot of things to look for, and it's going to be a really random combination. So if you can find one that gives you like crit multi and life, you've got a pretty good ring on your hands, but it really comes down to what the Herald of Thunder mods are. So bottom line is that we've got a very versatile and powerful ring that can provide an almost entirely defensive role or an entirely offensive role if you wanted to get 100% increased buff effects, 60% lightning damage, and some good implicits. The ring is inherently super cheap, so take a look around and see if you can find something that fits your build. And finally, as with a lot of elementally focused builds, if you're pretty cash flush, you can pick up a Taming Ring, which will give you a stack of resists and a ridiculous amount of elemental damage with attack skills, providing a guaranteed offensive boost that's hard to match. And finally, before we jump into the flasks, let's talk about the belts quick. And I do genuinely believe that a Stygian Vice will be the best option for this slot. At this point, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but stack that life, stack the resists, and shoot for as much percentage increased elemental damage and percentage increased elemental damage with attack skills as you can. Stygian Vices and belts in general can stack a lot. And on top of already having that super strong belt, you got the Abyssal Jewel socket. So grab a Murderous Eye Jewel that has a lot of life, 30 plus, that has lightning damage to attacks, or it has crit multi, or increased attack speed if you've crit recently. Any of those will serve you very well. Get the strongest or most defensive jewel you can. You can even stack additional resists onto the jewel in addition to the life if you need those resists from the belt specifically. If you're not wanting to go for a Stygian, go for a regular leather belt. That plus 40 implicit to life is huge. Just go for all the same stats we were talking about with the Stygian and just get a belt that hopefully is going to be granting you at least like 120 life, ideally. Even an extremely high life and high resist leather belt will be exceedingly cheaper than getting a very high rolled Stygian. Now it's time to talk about our flask choices. Our first and foremost choice is going to be a diamond flask, specifically one crafted with up to 80% increased critical strike chance during flask effect. Combining this flask with Assassin's Mark gives us our biggest possible boost to crit chance. Up next, we're going to have our Jade Flask of Reflexes. This flask gives us that flat 3000 to evasion rating and also can give us up to 100% increased evasion rating during that flask effect. On top of that, it also has 25% increased effect at the cost of a reduced duration penalty. This is one of the strongest defensive boosts that we can possibly get in a flask. The boost to our evasion is huge. I also like to have on the side a Jade Flask of Warding, specifically one that has an increased duration effect on it. So basically when we're running a map that has curses that are super undesirable, like Temporal Chains, Enfeeble, Elemental Weakness, stuff like that, we can go ahead and swap in a less efficient Jade Flask that gives us less evasion overall, but can last up to like 6.5 seconds and gives us that curse immunity, making mapping much smoother. For the third slot, we have 3 really fantastic options. Our most defensive choice will be a Stibnite Flask. It gives us another boost to evasion and creates a smoke cloud which will blind enemies, lowering their chance to hit by 50%. We can also get one that has the effect of Staunching, which will give us immunity to bleeding, giving us a nice boost to survivability. Our next option is going to be a Sulfur Flask, which gives us a nice boost to our damage as well as creating consecrated ground beneath us. While we stand on consecrated ground, we will regenerate 6% of our life per second, and hits against enemies standing on that consecrated ground have 100% increased critical strike chance. The consecrated ground effect is quite small though, but we can also add Staunching onto this flask as well, giving us that same defensive bonus. A really solid choice overall. Our final choice for the third slot is going to be the Wise Oak Flask. It's going to give us a boost to our inherent resistances, as well as allowing us to penetrate up to 15% of the enemy's resistances depending on which of our uncapped resists is higher. And also take 10% reduced damage of whatever elemental resistance is lowest. So balancing all 3 of our elemental resistances together to be at the same number is crucial to maximize the potential of this flask. This gives us a really solid offensive and defensive bonus if we can balance everything out, but it can be a tedious and difficult process depending on your build setup to find just the right numbers that you need to get everything all balanced out. If you think that some of the other flasks offer you a better opportunity, go for those instead. All 3 of these options are really fantastic. In the 4th slot, we have the easy-to-use Ziri's Promise. It gives us a nice 35% boost to our chaos resistance, as well as up to 20% of our physical damage as extra chaos, and 15% of our elemental damage as extra chaos during flask effect. The flask gives us a nice defensive bonus, and gives us a really solid chunk of DPS. And for our final slot, we're going to be using a Divine Life Flask. I tend to prefer one that has instant recovery, or at least partially instant recovery. We're leeching a lot and gaining a ton of life per enemy hit, per enemy killed. We're gaining life in a lot of different regards, and we don't really necessarily benefit a ton from having a very slow life effect. We really need a whoops, we actually got hit by something, let's use an instant flask to recover a lot of that back super quick, something you could even spam multiple times to basically recover to full life instantly. And you could of course slap on whatever secondary effect you think would be most helpful for you. I tend to go for immunity to freeze and chill just because the freezes can get you killed really quick, but even just having the instant life flask will typically free me up long enough to get in that attack and just blow everything up if they manage to freeze me somehow. And now let's go ahead and talk about the jewel options real quick. Including the slot in the Stygian Vise, we're going to have access to 6 total jewel sockets. 2 of those slots are going to be taken up by combat focus jewels. One of them will be Crimson, meaning you can't choose cold with Wild Strike, And one of those is going to be Cobalt, which means that Wild Strike cannot choose fire, leaving us with just that lightning focus that we want. We're also going to be running a Watcher's Eye Jewel. This build features both Precision and Wrath, meaning that we have a very large variety of crit and damage-based modifiers that we can choose from. You'll probably be looking at just running a single stat Watcher's Eye Jewel, at least relevant stat to the build, until you can afford something more expensive. If you want to focus on precision, you'd be looking at increased attack speed, increased attack damage, crit multiplier if you can afford it, or if you want to go for some utility, you can get gain a flash charge whenever you deal a critical strike, which will help your flasks be up much more frequently, especially against bosses. And if you decide to focus on Wrath, you can get percentage increased lightning damage. You can get damage penetrates X percentage of lightning resistance. You can also get increased critical strike chance as well. All these options are really fantastic and will serve the build in different ways. If you want to go for the utility, you can go for the precision flasks. If you want to go for damage, any of the precision or wrath modifiers will serve you pretty well. And finally, that leaves us with room for, we've got the one slot for the guaranteed Abyssal Jewel. Like I talked about the Stygian, just try to get 30 plus life. If you want resistances, go for that. Otherwise, you can get lightning damage to attacks. You can get attack speed if you crit recently, or even some crit multi. They'll all serve you well. Now for the final two slots, we have a really interesting opportunity. Because of how strange Wild Strike is, and because it encompasses so many different elements all in its gem tags, we can essentially create a normal jewel that has an unbelievable amount of crit multiplier on it. There are 5 available stats. There's regular crit multi, melee crit multiplier with lightning skills, cold skills, and fire skills. All of them will apply to Wild Strike. This build is going to be critting a lot, and if you can at least get 2 of those plus life, or get 3 to 4 of those modifiers if you're looking to go pure offense, you're going to be stacking tons and tons of damage because we're going to be critting most of the time while mapping. Fill out the remaining 2 slots by trying to get life on the jewel and as much crit multi as you possibly can. If you need more resist, you can fill them in here, try to couple those with life and any crit multi you can get your hands on. That's going to do it right there for all of our gear and jewel choices. Let's get into the links and the gems that make this build as powerful as it is. First and foremost, let's get into Wild Strike. Wild Strike features 2 different parts for each potential element you could use. There's a fire hit, followed by a fire explosion, lightning hit into lightning bolt, and cold hit into the icy wave it produces. For us, it'll just be the 2 lightning components. The lightning hit portion of the skill can be scaled by melee related gems, like Ruthless. However, both portions of the gem can be scaled very heavily with elemental or just general more multipliers. So we're going to be focusing on scaling both parts of the skill at the same time to make sure that our clear speed and our boss killing receive as many benefits as possible. Our first link is going to be damage on full life. When we are currently at a full life status, we're going to be dealing 49% more damage. This is a phenomenal choice for us because it's one of our biggest percentage more multipliers we have access to, and we are leeching tons of life, gaining life on hit, life on kill, and we have an instant life flask, meaning that we can go from very low to very high on life exceedingly quickly, making sure that this is up just about constantly. Our next link is going to be Multi-Strike. It causes this melee skill to trigger 3 times in a row. Each time, it will deal more damage. Overall, it gives us a less damage multiplier of 10%, but it gives us 44% more attack speed, and on that first repeat of the skill, we do 22% more damage, and the second repeat will do 44% more damage. This gem alone gives us more than 3.5 additional attacks per second, and gives us more multipliers to increase our damage, making this build feel much more fluid and sending out so many more chains when swinging into a pack. It would be easy to argue that Ancestral Call, our next link, is the most important link in the Wild Strike setup. It allows us to target 2 additional nearby enemies with strike skills, meaning that we can then send out 3 times as many chains. The difference this makes in clear speed cannot be understated and should absolutely be utilized. Our next link is going to be elemental damage with attacks. It is a phenomenal gem that gives us 54% more damage just in general. It doesn't get any better than this. And for our final slot, we have 2 really phenomenal choices: added lightning damage and inspiration support. At level 20, added lightning damage will give us 21 to 402 added lightning damage, drastically increasing our DPS. And to compete with it is going to be inspiration support, a super compelling support gem that I really feel should see more use. The inspiration support grants us 34% reduced mana cost, making Wild Strike substantially cheaper. It also generates inspiration charges up to 5 whenever you spend any mana on supported skills, meaning that we can generate those 5 charges very, very fast. Each charge grants us at level 20 10% increased critical strike chance, and 8% more elemental damage, meaning that at full inspiration charges, which are up just about every moment, we will have 50% increased critical strike chance and 40% more elemental damage. A very potent gem, and one that out DPS's added lightning damage just slightly in my build by a couple of percentage points. The only downside to inspiration is that you are going to lose all your inspiration charges after spending a total of 800 mana. Our skill costs 18 mana, meaning that after attacking with Wild Strike just 5 times, you'll have full inspiration charges, and that will last for another 39 attacks before it resets, and it will just regain those inspiration charges after 5 more attacks. Not even necessarily having any real downtime, just not giving you the full effect for a few attacks. I personally prefer and would recommend using inspiration as that final link for our Wild Strike setup. It grants us crit, a huge more multiplier to our damage, and even reduces the cost of the skill. I mean, what's not to love, honestly? And finally, let's say you got Tribal Fury as your anointment and you wanted to drop Ancestral Call from your 6th link in order to push boss damage. If that is the case, I would recommend swapping it for added lightning damage if you want to push the DPS of both the lightning hit and the chain portion of the skill. And if you really just want to push the boss killing potential of this, swap Ancestral Call for Ruthless, which will give you a huge single target DPS boost, but will not affect the chains at all, just the lightning hit directly, so you'll want to be making direct contact with the boss. Moving right along, we're going to jump into Whirling Blades. I specifically have this socketed in my gloves because of the 16% more attack and cast speed modifier that I have on them. If you're not running those gloves or you're running one of the unique options, you can socket this anywhere. However, I personally prefer to do Whirling Blades combined with faster attacks combined with Fortify. So when you charge into a boss or a set of packs, you're going to fortify on melee hit when you Whirling Blades into them, granting you 20% reduced damage taken from hits for 4 seconds, providing you with a fantastic defensive bonus that is up a surprising amount of the time. The Whirling Blades plus faster attacks and the 16% more attack and cast speed combo allows you to traverse the map unbelievably quickly and is highly recommended, but a lot of the other gloves have fantastic options as well, and you really can't go wrong. It's just my personal preference. Plus, just because it's convenient, I love to throw Portal into that combo as the 4th essential link. It's not actually doing anything for Whirling Blades, but it causes Portal to be cast so much quicker and makes it so that you can exit maps very quickly. Moving right along, we're going to have the 4-link of Wrath, Herald of Thunder, Precision, and an Enlighten, somewhere between level 2 and level 4. We picked each of these individual auras for a reason. Wrath specifically grants us, at level 20, 16 to 248 additional lightning damage with attacks, giving us a powerful DPS boost. Herald of Thunder grants us, at level 20, 19 to 76 lightning damage to attacks. And upon killing a shocked enemy while Herald of Thunder is active, it will start sending lightning bolts down to attack enemies, pots, any environmental objects. It just kind of generally assaults the entire environment around you with lightning damage. This effect can also be scaled with the Circle of Regret ring that we talked about earlier, and can increase the overall buff effect, giving us more damage and also causing it to deal more damage to the environment. And finally, we're going to be using a Precision, somewhere around the levels of 1 to 5, that's going to be granting us additional accuracy rating and somewhere around a 40% increase to our critical strike chance. All these auras are serving us one general purpose, and that's to increase our DPS. We're combining them specifically with an Enlighten level 2 to 4 to just decrease the amount of reservation that they hit us with. For our next setup, we're going to have a pretty interesting cast when damage taken at level 1, combined with Wave of Conviction at level 1. This means that when we take over 528 damage, it's going to cast a level 1 Wave of Conviction at our enemies. This will deal a very small amount of mostly lightning damage to our enemies and a tight AoE effect. This sounds a little wimpy, but it's going to be inflicting elemental exposure upon our enemies, especially bosses. This gives our enemies minus 25% to their elemental resistance that they took the most damage from, which in this case would be lightning. Whenever we manage to trigger this on a boss, we're going to get a humongous DPS boost, somewhere around 22% increased DPS. For a simple 2-link that triggers on its own, I would say that's pretty damn good. I want to give credit for this link idea to Reddit user Thackus for presenting this concept. Thanks, man. Next up is going to be the powerful defensive skill Steel Skin, and we're going to have it not linked to anything. It's just an independent skill. Its purpose in the build is very simple. It just gobbles up some of the damage that we would have taken, enhancing our survivability for almost no cost. Next up is going to be Vol Ancestral Warchief combined with Culling Strike. Vol Ancestral Warchief is a powerful totem skill. You can summon up to 2 totems, and whenever the totems are active, we're going to be dealing 32% more melee damage while those totems are active at level 20. This gives us a really good boost to use on bosses to improve our single target DPS. The totems themselves will be freaking out all over the room, attacking everything, and whenever they hit anything on super low life with their Culling Strike support, they're going to kill it instantly. So when we get bosses really low, if the totem is also attacking the boss, it will instantly slay them below 10% life. And finally, we have Vol Grace, Vol Haste, and Increased Duration socketed into a 3-link. This allows us to activate Vol Grace and Vol Haste for extended durations. Vol Grace at level 20 grants us 34% chance to dodge attack and spell hits, and Vol Haste at level 20 grants us 31% increased attack speed and 13% movement speed. These short duration buffs can be utilized multiple times a map and are often used in situations where I either want to heavily increase my survivability or my attack speed. Great during bossing, blights, during Legion encounters. They're useful in almost every situation and should be popped frequently and always during a boss fight. This wraps up all the skills that we need for this build, and we can go ahead and hop into the Bandit choice. All 4 options are indeed solid, but 2 stand out very heavily to me. The first would be to kill all the bandits. This is often a top tier choice or even the best choice in a lot of builds, and here is no different. I would highly recommend just killing them because we have a lot of different places we want to go in the tree and not enough points. However, for this build, Alira is quite tempting. The increase to global critical strike multiplier is very nice for our DPS, and the 15% to all elemental resistances make it so that we don't have to get as many resistances on other pieces of our gear, meaning that we can focus more heavily on getting DPS on items such as our amulet and our belt. Ultimately, it will come down to personal preference, but I would either help Alira or kill all of the bandits. Next up, we're going to touch on the Pantheon choices. My primary recommendation would be to go for Soul of Lunaris as our major god. Soul of Lunaris really just fits into our theme perfectly of just trying to avoid the damage entirely, just not even get hit in the first place, although it does give us physical damage reduction and movement speed for each nearby enemy, making engaging packs a little bit smoother and a little safer. And of major note with this is going to be capturing Ancient Architect for a 10% chance to avoid projectile damage, which is pretty huge, and also capturing Severed Crescent's Point to have an additional 5% chance to dodge, attack, and spell hits if you've been hit recently. You can also capture Ambrius to avoid all projectiles that have chained, which is another fantastic buff. I really would recommend Lunaris as the first choice. There are a few different minor god options that I feel present the build with a reasonable defensive buff. Soul of Rithslotha, which gives us 3 additional charges for our life flasks every 3 seconds if we haven't used one recently. But if we go ahead and capture the soul of Garrulus Will Thief, we'll get 60% increased life recovery from flasks when we use them specifically on low life. So when using that flask on low life, instead of recovering maybe 900 or 1000 health instantly, we're going to be recovering closer to 1600, which is a really nice boost to survivability and recovery rate. And finally, we're going to have Soul of Grugon, which is an additional 5% chance to evade attacks if you've taken a savage hit recently. In Path of Exile, a savage hit is considered a hit that removes at least 15% of the target's maximum life, which is going to happen fairly frequently while mapping or bossing. Thus, for just a small minor soul, we're going to be gaining a really solid chance to evade attacks when we take a reasonable hit from any enemy. Plus, on top of that, if you capture the Stalker of Endless Dunes, you'll be gaining a 6% increase to movement speed if you haven't been hit recently, which is going to be most of the time with such an evasive build, which is just a nice boost to our mobility in general. Either of those options will serve you very well. With that covered, I think it's time to start discussing the Raider Ascendancy. Right away, we're going to be looking at the broad overview of the changes made to Raider in 3.8. These are mostly minor numerical buffs, but there are a few real changes in here. What we're going to be taking advantage of is the improvements to Avatar of the Slaughter, the improvements to Rapid Assault, and the improvements to Avatar of Chase. With our first ascension, we'll be taking 9 and 10, getting Rapid Assault. The minor node leading to Rapid Assault now gives us increased Onslaught effect, providing us with more attack speed and more movement speed rather than just duration. Rapid Assault was also improved, giving us another 5% chance to evade attacks. So in total, we're going to be gaining 23% attack speed, 23% movement speed, chance to evade attacks, 20% increased attack damage, and basically permanent Onslaught, all from the first Ascendancy. For our second Ascendancy, we're going to be getting 11 and then 12, picking up Avatar of the Chase. The minor node here was also buffed to give us increased Onslaught effect, and then almost every aspect of Avatar of the Chase was improved numerically, but it still does the same thing, essentially doubling our Onslaught effect, and then giving us more chance to evade melee attacks and projectile attacks, as well as giving us an increased damage. So just from these two nodes, we're getting 50% increased attack damage, 46% increased attack speed, 46% increased movement speed, as well as some huge defensive buffs. The 30% more chance to evade melee and projectile attacks is a monstrous buff and does a lot of work in getting us towards our cap of 95%. For our third Ascendancy, we'll be going 1 and then 2 to pick up Way of the Poacher, which gives us another boost to attack speed and basically permanent frenzy charges, as well as an additional maximum frenzy charge. From there, we'll be going 3 and 4 with our Uber Lab to pick up our fourth and final Ascendancy of Avatar of the Slaughter. Avatar of the Slaughter has been buffed very heavily. It now gives us 8% increased evasion rating per frenzy charge. We also gain more movement speed per frenzy charge, 3% rather than 2, and 8% increased attack damage per frenzy charge, up from 3. So now when we have our 8 frenzy charges up, we're going to be gaining, just from this one node, we'll be getting 64% increased evasion rating, 24% movement speed, 24% attack speed, and an additional 64% increased attack damage when we have a full investment in the build and all of our frenzy charges. I love taking this Ascendancy in this specific order, picking up the Onslaught nodes first because they provide us with an instant benefit that requires no real investment. If you pick up Rapid Assault and Avatar of the Chase, you're going to be getting that 46% increased attack and movement speed, as well as a massive damage bonus, without really having to commit anything. Nothing in the tree, you're just going to be getting Onslaught just through fighting in general. Because in contrast, getting Way of the Poacher and Avatar of the Slaughter to their maximum potential requires having 7 or 8 frenzy charges. It requires all those frenzy charges in the tree, and to get additional maximum frenzy charges from your items as well, which makes it great to pick up later in the game as you get your boots. As you have those points to spend in the tree, you'll be getting up to 7 or 8 frenzy charges, and then you'll be deriving massive benefit from it, which makes it best to pick up later in the game. So in summary, grab Rapid Assault, then Avatar of the Chase, followed by Way of the Poacher and Avatar of the Slaughter. Now, let's go ahead and take a overview look at the skill tree in general. Heading out of the Raider starting area, we're going to be moving down and grabbing all of those life nodes. They also grant us evasion as well, making them the optimal place to start. We'll also be grabbing Heart of the Oak for its defensive benefits and boost to our maximum life. From there, you're probably going to want to move down and right to pick up Primeval Force for a massive boost to our elemental damage, and then moving down to pick up Twin Terrors, which gives us a 115% crit chance, a bunch of accuracy, and a little bit of crit multi as well. While you're there, you can pick up Thick Skin for a huge maximum life bonus. Moving up, we're going to be grabbing Herbalism for another life bonus, as well as improved life recovery from Flasks, increasing the amount we can instantly recover. You'll also want to be picking up this jewel socket right away. You'll also want to be buying the 2 combat focus jewels, the Crimson and the Cobalt, very early on in the leveling process. As soon as we get this specific jewel socket right next to Heartseeker, you should put the Cobalt Crimson focus jewel in there. These do have attribute requirements, and these specific attribute requirements are fulfilled in this spot. There are other spots in the tree you can put this later on if you wanted, but for now it will function here. And as we move up later on, we're going to be getting the jewel socket above the claw nodes, which we can put the Crimson jewel in. Both of these effects will be triggered, and we will be able to focus our damage to just specifically lightning. This will, even early on, allow us to improve our clear speed and make the build much more powerful and direct. As we're moving up the right side of the tree, if you have a way to generate frenzy charges while leveling, like Ice Bite or Blood Rage, go ahead and grab the frenzy charges right away, otherwise just save those for later as we get our 3rd and 4th Ascendancies. You'll also want to be picking up Heartseeker for the crit chance and crit multi bonus, and then moving up, we have the Acrobatics Phase Acrobatics line. These are very powerful defensive boosts and ones that I heavily recommend for a build this evasion focus to pick up all 5 of those nodes. We also have the more optional, but very helpful Survivalist to the left, which grants us a big chunk of evasion rating, as well as a nice base chance to evade attacks, and some resists, which make gearing a little bit smoother. Moving straight up, we're going to be trying to get as quickly as possible to these claw nodes. Hopefully you're leveling with claws as well, and we're going to be trying to rush over to get both Claws of the Hawk and then move into Soul Raker. All of these nodes are fantastic. We get, just going to Claws of the Hawk, about 100% increased critical strike chance, as well as 55% to our critical strike multiplier. We also get a chance to blind enemies, and then grabbing Soul Raker, we're going to be leeching just from straight attack damage. Not like physical, just all attack damage we'll be leeching from. and this does not affect just life. This affects mana as well, and will instantly solve any mana issues you're having and pretty much just locks in the build all the way through endgame to never have any mana problems at all. You'll also be gaining an impressive amount of life leech. For virtually no investment in the tree, you'll be gaining over 1400 a second in the very late levels. That's for 2 points. It doesn't get much better than that. We'll also be going along the top of the Claw node to get Claws of the Magpie for a big bonus to our attack speed as well as a nice damage increase. You can leave that one node Claw damage and leech unticked. It's just not really necessary for the build whatsoever. Once we have those 2 jewel sockets and pick up the Claw nodes, we have all of our leech functioning, we have the combat focused jewels that we need, and from here, the selections and the pathing kind of open up to different variations. Now you can make some decisions on what you want to prioritize the most. Above the area where we just got the last jewel socket will be an additional node, Claws of the Falcon, for more crit and crit chance. You can work to the left and work towards Revenge of the Hunted to pick up life and evasion, grab another jewel socket, and work up into coordination, blood siphon. Additional life and crit nodes are basically everywhere up here. Or if you wanted to work on a different area of the tree, you can work left from the jewel socket next to our starting area and grab Master of the Arena. You can grab Art of the Gladiator and Bravery for increased life, melee range, regen, attack speed. Dervish down below in our path also grants more attack speed and damage, and then there's Golem's Blood and another jewel socket waiting for you. Finally, if you just finished your 3rd Ascendancy, you're going to want to start to work on the Frenzy charges, spending the 2 points in the 3 different places on the tree to pick up the maximum Frenzy charges. And if you're feeling very comfortable, you have 7 or 8 Frenzy charges maximum, or you even finished your Uber Lab and you have a lot of other investment in the tree, go ahead and work your way down into Disciple of Slaughter, which will grant us, with 8 Frenzy charges, 40% increased evasion rating, another 16% movement speed, 16% attack speed. It basically gives you a permanent minimum Frenzy charge, as well as 40% increased damage with all of your Frenzy charges up. Just very strong overall, a nice balanced set of nodes that give us a lot of benefit. Whenever I link a path of building or discuss a skill tree, I just have to say that this is not a dead requirement. This is not some rigid plan that you absolutely have to follow to a T. If you feel like I could have made improvements to pathing, or that I got some clusters that you just don't care for, or you really want to pick something else up, think about what you can sacrifice from the core build to make that happen. Putting your own spin on these guides and making your own little changes and optimizations is half the fun of it. This is merely a set of my best recommendations and how I personally feel the build functions the best, but your idea of how the build functions best might be drastically different than mine. And with that said, I believe that I've covered every part of the build that I can think of. This is a long video, and it's got a lot of details in it, but if I missed something important or you have a question, please leave a comment, and I'm pretty good about responding to those within a reasonable amount of time. I'll be happy to help with any build questions or help you if you're having issues developing the build. If you made it this far, I really appreciate your support, and I hope you enjoyed. I'm going to try to keep making more longer form content and to continue to produce builds, hopefully just about every week. This build is super fun and satisfying to play, and it's going to be kind of hard to move on from it. Raider is in a really good place with all the buffs it got. It can attack ridiculously fast, it has so much evasion now too. It's just very competitive with Deadeye now in my opinion. I'd never even heard of Wild Strike before this league, but the recent changes to the combat focus jewel make it so good, and I can't wait to even try out the ice or fire versions in future leagues. This would make a pretty easy and flexible league starter. And I'd like to credit YouTube user Jmart for suggesting Wild Strike in the first place. Like I said, I didn't even know that the skill existed, but his timing was fantastic with the changes made this league, and it was a super fun build to play. Thanks for the suggestion, man. And thank you to everyone for the support on the Molten Strike Indigon Slayer build. I never anticipated it would even get a third that many views for a long time, but it performed extremely well and it motivated me to get started on this build. So finally, thank you to everyone for watching this video. I appreciate the support. As always, I've been Estero, and I'll see you guys in the next video.